Hey, sorry I've been a little bit inactive, but I mean, school started, so reason. First off, I would like to define objectivity by quoting Ayn Rand. Considering and then you can come to the conclusion whether or not people actually subscribe to her philosophy, and I'm pretty sure you will decide that nobody actually does who uses the term objectivity. Everyone uses it incorrectly. So Ayn Rand says, objectivity is both a metaphysical and epistemological concept. It pertains to the relationship of consciousness to existence. Metaphysically, it is the recognition of the fact that reality exists independent of any perceiver's consciousness. Epistemologically, it is the recognition of the fact that a perceiver's consciousness must acquire knowledge of reality by certain means, which would be reason, in accordance with certain rules, which would be logic. This means that although reality is immutable, and in any given context, only one answer is true. The truth is not automatically available to human consciousness, and can be obtained only by a certain mental process, which is required of every man who seeks knowledge. So, as you can tell, that definition by Ayn Rand is totally inconsistent with almost every user on YouTube who throws the word objectivity in front of a term, I guess, to give it more credit or something. But I'll explain objectivity a little bit later. Right now I want to address values. The thing is no matter how abstract a word is, they shouldn't be even remotely considered subjective, meaning definitions of abstractions shouldn't differ from person to person. That would be the destruction of language. So, first thing I would like to note is, or to have everyone note, is values exist because we exist. If life did not exist, values would not exist. So values only exist because life exists. Matter exists eternally. It doesn't have a choice. It doesn't have an alternative whether or not to exist. It has to always exist. But life, on the other hand, has the alternative to either live or to die. This is very, very important. Life is sustained based on actions or the choices that are made. So, especially to volitional beings, this is kind of what creates value, this alternative of whether living or dying. Since matter doesn't have that alternative, matter doesn't have value. So it's very important to note that value exists because life exists. And so choices become very important when you're talking about survivability. The fact that one choice is more important than the other. Okay, that's how we determine that values do in fact exist. So who's to say that living is better than death, or who's to say that we should even live? Who's to say that reality, wouldn't be better off without humankind? Why does man even need values? Why should survival matter? These questions are totally easy for me because I value life. But of course, maybe other people don't. So the best way to answer these questions would be to just observe nature, because nature doesn't answer what is right versus what is wrong. Nature simply is. The primary objective of all living organisms would be to survive. That is the primary objective. So when defining defining value and determining what is important and what isn't important, the standard is survivability. So it has to be the standard for defining values. And in fact, it's the base. You tear rights down, you tear morality down, you tear value down, and it all kind of comes back down to survivability. So when you're defining things like a right and morality and value, this all depends on the functionality that these things correlate upon survival. The definition of a right, which is the moral principle which defines and sanctions our freedoms within a social context, is essential to our survivability. So that's really the point I would like to drive home, I guess. So we can determine reasonably that survival is better than death, that the alternative of survival is way better than death. We can say that one course of action is far more important than another course of action based on the losses and gains that are incurred from that specific course of action. So values exist. The value of sober driving is far more important than the value of drunk driving, because the value of sober driving is a functional value, and the value of drunk driving is a dysfunctional value. If something functions, I would argue that it would be considered a fact. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a functional means of thinking, and 2 plus 2 of 5 is obviously a dysfunctional means of thinking. Reality exists whether man perceives it or not. Fact would be something that exists. So since we exist, in turn, values also exist. So like I said before, value only pertains to a variable with an alternative, i.e. life or death. So I would argue that values exist. In fact, I wouldn't even argue that. Values do exist. But so long as they meet a certain criteria. Obviously, I mean, they're functional, they're functional so long as they meet a certain criteria, which that criteria would be based upon survivability. So getting back to your brick wall theory, Amendum, I mean, this video was kind of posted for everybody, not necessarily in response to you. I mean, you brought up some topics that I wanted to touch up on, but you used the inevitable brick wall analogy. Yeah, I would unfortunately agree. I mean, I think there's a ton of horrendous philosophies just compiling upon one another that are going to inevitably drive us into this brick wall and slaughter us horrifically. But I like to be just a little bit more optimistic than that. I like to think that it'll be people like you, and who, I mean, even though you and I have differing philosophies and differing ways of living life, you do want a better future, and you do want a better society to live in, and you are, you believe in things with reason. I mean, you have reasons to believe in things. So I mean, it's not like you're not a reasonable human being. But I like to think that as people like you and people who explicitly state that they're trying to better the world, based upon certain, based upon reasonable things. I mean, somebody who says, I'm going to better the world by slaughtering mankind would obviously not be fucking rational. But I like to think that it's these kinds of people who will change our society and make it a better place, and maybe we won't hit this brick wall. Because, I mean, there has been progress. I mean, if you look back, over the history, there's been progress. Plenty of scientific progress. Not a whole lot of philosophical progress, unfortunately. So, of course, as science progresses and we get more technical, our philosophies need to do the same thing. But, unfortunately, people are so psychologically dependent upon mysticism that they're kind of afraid to abandon that. And so when you mix mysticism with nuclear weapons, you get destruction and lots of killing, which is unfortunate. But that's that's something we have to change through reason. I hate to say that rhetoric is needed, because I hate the fact that we have to persuade someone in order to agree with reason. I think reason should be persuasion enough. For somebody, and if somebody could just look at reality and be like, oh yeah, this exists, and then accept it and live their life accordingly. But unfortunately that's not the case. Unfortunately we have to use reason as well as persuasion. We have to, I guess, hit people on the level of their emotional values, which are total bullshit. But unfortunately, I think it's what may have to be done if we want to kind of convert enough people to accept reality and accept that certain things exist whether they like it or not. Kind of running out of time, and I'm forgetting everything I wanted to touch up on. But yeah, so anyways, good video, and yeah.